focus is on the families right now, making sure that we are supporting the folks who are facing difficult times.
We can't allow Canada's #1 export industry to go without a fight.
I'm suggesting that the carbon tax is making Canada a less attractive place to do business and to produce things.
Alberta is facing an economic emergency requiring immediate action to save jobs.
We are essentially giving our oil away for free. Fiscal and economic insanity, my friends, insanity.
The calls to action got a little louder this week between Alberta's oil sector and Ontario's auto industry. It's hard to ignore the economic and job uncertainty there. So how should governments respond, and at what political price? The At Issue Gang is here to unpack that and whatever else I come up with. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and joining us this week is Jason Markusoff from Maclean's, and he is in Calgary. Good to see you. Okay, so let me start with sort of the broader question, and you can go to the specific industries if you want, but what could or should governments be doing in these kinds of situations? Chantal.
Certainly looking for ways, if there are any, to soften the blows in the case of GM. I don't think governments can buy their way out of what is happening to this restructuring of a company, a private company. But certainly it is a major hit, and I think it's the business of government to ensure that this is a one-off and not the beginning of a trend in the auto industry.
Right.
So that's that. In the case of Alberta, of course, the federal role is a bit more complicated and complex because it involves pipelines. And at this juncture, the sense you get from the federal government, at least so far, is that they bought a pipeline. They are trying to find a way out of the quandary on Trans Mountain, but there is also a sense that they've expended a lot of political capital on this issue, and that there isn't very much more that they can see that they can do in the immediate.
So the issue, or that they ask, I guess, that the Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, had for them to invest in trains seems to be going nowhere. And today she said, well, I'm going to at least go ahead with part of that on my own today. So, Andrew, is there a role for government in supporting industries like this when they are in crisis or collapsing, or however you want to frame it?
There's a role for government in supporting workers, less so in supporting industries. So Chantal's absolutely right. When people are caught in this type of situation through no fault of their own, it's government's role to help them make the transition to some other employment. And I'm not trying to minimize how difficult that will be for a lot of these people. But those people are there in large part because of previous supports to that industry. That they were told that if the jobs will remain in Oshawa because governments had previously propped up and bailed out and subsidized the car companies and the car industry. And if there's anything that this should teach us, it's when you try and buy jobs, the jobs just remain as long as the subsidies do, and they don't last after that. And what happens is the car companies just keep coming back for more and more and more and try playing them off against each other. It's a losing game. The only way you're ever going to get jobs to stay in a place is because it makes sense to the company and the industry to be there. That's the only guarantee you have. Right. So I don't know how much. I mean, everybody's trying to capitalize on this for political gain, right and left. And so I don't know, I don't think the carbon tax had anything to do with this. I think when you see that they closed 4 plants in the States as well, going forward, absolutely, you want to do everything you can as an economy in Ontario to make yourself an attractive place for car companies and everybody else to invest, but not in ways that involve buying jobs, but simply in creating the kind of environment where companies will want to invest there because it makes sense to do so in rational economic terms.
Right. So, Jason, I mean, to both of our friends' point there, it is true that the oil industry is a little bit different. First of all, the scale of the layoffs, how much bigger it is as a source of GDP in this country. But is there something for government to be doing here? I'm not sure it's what Rachel Notley is suggesting, but what kind of response would make sense, if any?
Well, I mean, we're in this remarkable phase where the leader of the opposition, one of the most conservative members of Stephen Harper's cabinet, is advocating a command and control, heavy-handed economic move of ordering all industry in the oil sector to move in lockstep to dial back its production to help lower this or ease this oil discount. And if by Jason Kenney doing this, coming from the right to do this, this gives Notley some remarkable room to do this herself and to toggle the levers. You could imagine the backlash if an NDP premier on her own was suddenly mandating what the oil companies can and can't do. There's this, the whole idea that people have these, the old right-wing rhetoric, we're going to run government like a business. Well, that works up until the moment where the chips are down and only government can come and step in. Because people expect the government to come in when the shareholders make a decision that this isn't economical and when whole industries are at stake. This is why the bailout in 2008 worked when it was a momentary crisis situation because of the credit facility issue. And in this case, this is a very temporary, momentary problem for the oil patch because of the lack of pipelines. A lot of people here see this as the government failed on pipelines. The government is the only one that can fix this.
But if that were true, you could say to that, but we bought you a pipeline. I mean, that could be the government's response.
Well,
That's
right. The pipeline is going to help a lot with the price differential when it's open. The pipeline's going to open at best maybe 20. If and when that's 2022, 2023. Even even Rachel Notley becoming a railway baron, as my colleague Paul Wells said the other day, is only going to help once those trains come online in December 2019. You're hearing a remarkable number of very conservative, very pro-free market politicians and business leaders in Calgary saying that, yes, this is the point at which we actually need the government to step in and toggle the levers of production for the whole province. It's a very unusual situation, but this is being seen widely as the only thing that can really erase this major risk in the short term.
So while the situations are different, I mean, they are similar in that there are problems and broader economic questions at issue as well. But Chantal, what are the politics involved here? If the federal government is willing to buy a pipeline because it's, they say, in the national interest, why aren't they willing to do X, Y, and Z to help other industries?
But I think it's a completely different proposition. What is happening in Oshawa is what happened here in Quebec when GM closed its last plant in the province. But it does not, so far, involve the entire auto industry. It's a business decision that GM is taking. It is reallocating resources to a different model for what it thinks are the times that are coming. What is happening in Alberta is in no small part related to the fact that the province lacks the capacity to get all of the oil that it produces to tidewater, and so is losing out on this, and in a way that affects just about the entire industry in the province, not just one section of it. So I think that's completely different. That being said, I am not discounting the fact that Alberta is on the verge of a provincial election, and that plays in the rhetoric on both sides. Both the NDP and the Conservatives in that province.
Another way, Rosie, of describing the difference between the two situations is the problem in Ontario that they're facing right now is the legacy of past actions by government in areas that they shouldn't have gotten into. That is to say, of subsidizing the auto industry to stay larger than it really should have been by market forces alone. The problem in Alberta is the failure of governments to act in areas where they should have acted, i.e. in getting approvals for pipelines. And having dropped the ball on that, it does open the way for people to make arguments, whether they stand up or not. The government, having created this problem, has an obligation to help people tide over until they can fix the particular problem the government made.
That's a good way of explaining it. Jason, let me end with you, though. If it doesn't seem like what the federal government has done so far is satisfactory to people in Alberta, particularly people working in the oil industry, I'm not saying that it should be, but what is the political cost to the federal government of not going any further?
Oh, we talk about the oil price differential out here a lot. I think there's also in Alberta a Trudeau differential. Everything that he does will have a large degree less of credibility than it would if anybody not named Trudeau would do it. Trudeau came out here last week, and I think he was sort of gobsmacked in a way that people don't give him more credit for buying a pipeline, which is ultimately, once it's built, if it's built, a $12 billion proposition.
And so does that make sense to you, Chantal? Because it seems in the things that Jason's been writing, some other people have been writing, that there is this sort of central Canada versus Western Canada feeling out there, and that disconnect, yeah.
But I do think he's right about the Trudeau thing, not the central Canada thing so much.
Okay.
If Stephen Harper were Prime Minister, I'm willing to bet good money that he would have been reversed in courts on his pipeline projects in the same way as Trudeau was. I'm assuming he would have bought a pipeline, but I'm not sure. But if he had, he would probably have been treated more like a hero than the way that Justin Trudeau was treated.
So, Andrew, this will really be the last word. What, if anything, there is there for Trudeau to gain from doing that kind of thing? I mean, it almost shows you that trying to help an industry, it may not always have a political payoff.
Oftentimes you just store up trouble for yourself, there's no doubt. In this case, you know, I think it's a sort of the inverse of when Harper mishandled the environmental file and made it seem as if he was the enemy in this. Having said at one point that he's going to phase out the oil industry, even if that was also Harper's position in the long term, it's very hard for you to get a hearing, even if you're trying to help the oil industry. It's stamped on people's minds that Trudeau basically doesn't want the energy industry to exist, and whatever he does from this point, it's not going to buy him a lot of credit.
Okay. Good talk, everybody. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week, we're going to talk more about the fallout from Ontario's cuts to Francophone services, including within Doug Ford's own caucus. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.